Hey, it's Jamie, your prairie pal from Pioneers Park Nature Center. The prairie's a great place to hide, don't you think? What animals can you guys think of that might live out here in the prairie? Did you guys think of a prairie dog? That's usually what comes to mind. So if I was a prairie dog, I would be able to have a really good hiding spot. But so would predators like coyotes and fox and badger. So if I was a prairie dog, living in a more open prairie, like a shortgrass prairie, would be an ideal habitat for me. Here in the tallgrass prairie, we can also find gophers and ground squirrels, mice and voles. They scurry on the surface right in all the grass, really hard to find them, and some of them also live underground. Did you also think of big herbivores that eat all of this grass, like elk and deer, and also bison? Millions of bison once roamed the prairie. Today they don't roam free, but we do have different herds of bison across Nebraska and across the Great Plains that are still roaming and grazing in prairie areas. Here at Pioneers Park Nature Center, we have 7 female bison that you can come and visit. Bison are important to prairies. Traditionally, bison would have spread seeds all across the prairie. Those seeds get stuck in their fur, and as that bison roams around, the seeds drop off. They were really important parts of dispersing seeds across wide open spaces. Bison also help prairies by grazing. Bison are herbivores. That means that they eat plants, and bison prefer grasses, and that helps the prairie also. Remember all of those plants that were growing on the prairie besides grasses, those forbs with flowers? So if bison are eating a ton of grass, that helps those flowers to grow taller and be more diverse in the prairie also. Today, since we don't have bison all over the place, many places that have wide open spaces, prairies and pastures, they use cattle to graze. Cattle do similar things as bison. They eat the plants and grasses that grow here. Although cattle aren't as picky as the bison, and they'll sometimes eat the forbs. So bison are an important animal for prairies. They also supported the people that once lived out here thousands of years ago. So prairies and bison work together.
Hey, thanks, Jamie, for exploring prairie mammals with us. In another video, we explored invertebrates on the prairie, but there are lots of other animals out here. Can you name some of them? If you just called out a bunch of really cool birds and reptiles and amphibians, you're right. Let's take a quick look at just 2 of each of those different kinds of animals that call the tallgrass prairie home. Birds. What makes an animal a bird? There's one thing. If you've got it, you're a bird. If you're a bird, you've got it. Feathers. Feathers are these amazing features that all birds have that keeps them warm, keeps them cool, keeps them dry, and helps them fly. Prairie birds are special because you don't find them away from the prairie, and that's why protecting prairie habitats is so important. Prairie chickens are these really cool ground birds, which means they don't fly very much. They can, but they rather just run along the ground. And they like tall grass with a little bit of shrubs in it, places where they can really hide. But once a year, they seek out areas where the grass is a little shorter and thinner, and the male prairie chickens go out there and dance. They do these crazy dances where they stamp their feet and spin around in circles. They have these big orange pouches on their neck that they can blow up, and when they let the air back out, it makes this crazy boom sound. And these are the male chickens doing all this. Why? Just for the girls. Once a male prairie chicken and a female prairie chicken decide they like each other and mate, they go off their separate ways back into the tallgrass prairie, and the female goes and makes the nest and raises the young. Who knows what our state bird is? That's right, the western meadowlark. You often hear this beautiful flute-like song way before you ever see the bird. But when you do see one, watch for the yellow on their front with a very distinct black V. Western meadowlarks actually prefer short grass and mixed grass prairies. So around here, the places where you'll see them is out in pastures that have been grazed and along fence posts next to tall grass prairies. These are just 2 of hundreds of birds that depend on the tall grass prairie. How about reptiles? What kinds of reptiles would you find in a tall grass prairie? Things like snakes, lizards maybe, turtles near ponds, near prairie ponds. So what makes an animal a reptile? Well, for one thing, they're cold-blooded, so they regulate their temperature by moving into the sun or into the shade. That's how they keep their temperature just right. So when it cools way off in the wintertime, reptiles are going to be finding a safe place to stay because they can't move. Reptiles have special skin made up of scales or bony plates. They can live in all kinds of habitats, but they really like prairies because, especially in the summer, they're nice and warm and there's lots of things for them to eat. So one snake that you might find out here on the prairie is the bull snake. Bull snakes love living in these prairies where they can catch all kinds of mice. They'll even eat little insects sometimes, but they really like small rodents. You don't need to worry about seeing a snake out on the prairie. Snakes usually will know that you're coming long before you ever see them. Because they don't have any legs, their whole body is right on the ground and they can feel all kinds of vibrations. So they usually run and hide long before you'll ever see them. Turtles are reptiles that have these big bony plates on their back instead of thin scales. Snapping turtles are reptiles that like to live in and around prairie ponds. They eat all kinds of stuff. Snapping turtles will eat fish, bugs, dead stuff, baby ducks, anything they can get hold of. I've even heard of a snapping turtle grabbing and pulling a great blue heron, which is this tall, under the water to eat it. And yes, they do indeed snap. So if you ever see a snapping turtle, don't mess with them. Prairie skink is, as the name implies, a lizard that can only be found on prairies. Skinks can be mistaken for snakes, but they really do have legs. And like many lizards, if a skink is caught by another animal, they can drop their tail and their tail will wiggle and distract the predator while the skink gets away. And then the last group I'd like to talk to you about is amphibians. What are amphibians? What kind of animals? Frogs, toads, salamanders, right. Amphibians, like reptiles, are cold-blooded, but they need to live close to or in water all the time because they lay their eggs right in the water. Their larvae, or tadpoles, go through metamorphosis in the water. So amphibians need good, healthy prairie ponds. So prairie wetlands are important places. Cricket frogs are one of Nebraska's smallest frogs. Cricket frogs are always found in or around the edges of prairie ponds and creeks. These little frogs have pointy noses, and as adults, they're only about the size of a quarter. These pointy little frogs have very distinct calls. One way to try and figure out different frog calls is to try and figure out a way that you could replicate that call. How about this? Just a couple of rocks clicked together. Sounds a little bit like a cricket frog. One of our biggest amphibians is the woodhouse's toad. They can be about the size of a softball or a grapefruit. Toads need water, just like frogs, for their eggs and tadpoles, but as adults, they can be found further away from the water. Woodhouse's toads have this kind of screamy call. Your teacher's going to love this. Can you make that sound? Amphibians are very sensitive to changes in their environment. They don't do well in polluted water. So by watching amphibians, we can tell how healthy a habitat is or maybe isn't. Wetlands surrounded by healthy, diverse prairies are the best places to find healthy amphibians.